Welcome to the NC Choices webinar series, Teaching Tools for Beginning Farmers, funded by the United States Department of Agriculture's Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. I'm Matt Poore, and I'm going to be presenting the module on beef cattle production management. This is one of 7 modules offered in this webinar series. In this presentation, we'll talk about breeding and genetics of beef cattle. If you're interested in other resources offered by NC Choices, you can find out more on our website or on our YouTube channel. Today's module is going to focus on what can be a very complicated topic, genetics. And I'm going to give you an introduction to this topic, but it can be very complex. So rather than getting confused, start understanding some of the very basic principles and the things that you need to know as a beginning farmer, and then start to read about it and study it, because it is something that can be overwhelming at first, but is very, very important to the overall system. So understanding genetics is incredibly important, basically because we have a lot of different genetic material that we can select from out there. We need to understand those basic principles so that we can decide on a breed that we want to use, how to select the breeding stock that we're going to be using in the future. We need to understand EPDs, expected progeny differences. That's the way that we, in modern genetics, we select animals. We need to think about crossbreeding and crossbreeding systems and where that fits our farm. And we also need to think a little bit about how big we want these cows and how efficient we need our production system to be. So I'll start with talking about a very simple genetic trait, which is color. And you know that most cattle, if you go out and you look, you see a lot of red ones and you see a lot of black ones. And so those are the 2 most common hair colors. And hair coat is controlled by a single gene. So that particular trait is a simple dominant gene where black is dominant. And so an animal that is black has either 2 black genes or 1 black gene and 1 red gene. And if the animal has 2 red genes that it inherited from his parents, it will be red. But it has to have both of those to be of the red color. So if you cross a black or one with 2 copies of black genes to an animal that's red, that therefore has 2 copies of the red gene, all of the calves will be black. And so just keep that in mind. And if you understand the basic Mendelian inheritance of genetics, you know that those black offspring, if you bred them together, where each one of them has both a black and a red, 1/4 of the resulting calves will be red, because 1/4 will get a red gene from both parents. So another thing to think about, we have the Baldy. So this is when you breed a Hereford, which is a red with a white face, to a black Angus, you will get what we call the black Baldy. White face, black hair coat, but with 1 red and 1 black gene. If you breed that to a red bull, then you might get a red calf, and in this case actually half the calves would be red, half the calves would be black. So if you're trying to produce black calves, you need to understand this, that a red bull on a crossbred cow with a red gene will give you a red calf, and they're more difficult to sell in most markets that are looking for black calves. And so sometimes that mixture is not what you want. So you need to understand that basic principle so that the animals are the color that you want them to be. Now another trait, and this is one that we all should be aware of and thinking about, is horns. Horns are recessive. And so an animal with horns means that it has 2 of the recessive genes for horns. Otherwise it will be polled or not have horns. And so a polled bull that is homozygous for horns, bred to a horned animal, all of the resulting offspring will be polled, will not have horns. And because of the traumatic way that horns have to be removed from animals, it's strongly recommended that we use a polled bull to remove the horns before before the animal is actually born, when they're conceived. And so using a Angus bull, for example, Angus is a polled breed. There are no horned animals in the Angus breed. And breeding them to your herd, you will always have calves that do not have horns. And so again, another thing, another principle you need to be aware of, so that you don't end up with half your calves having horns, which that can happen if you use a crossbred polled bull. Now, the other type of traits that we are interested in, and of course there are others of these simple traits, but we need to be thinking about what we call quantitative traits. Those are things like how large the animal is, how fast they grow, and that sort of thing. Usually with these kind of traits, it's not just a single gene as it is with the color or with horns. It's many genes that impact that. A lot of the genes that code for the enzymes and the machinery of the body that do the work to make the things work are controlled by very many genes. They're also influenced by many environmental factors, such as nutrition and temperature and those kinds of things. And you'll normally see them expressed over a range. It's not just red or black. It's a continuous range of numbers that we get on, for example, birth weight or weaning weight. And so these are more complicated to deal with, and these are the ones that we have what we call the expected progeny differences, and we'll talk about that later on in the talk. But just be aware that once we get to the quantitative traits, they're much more complex and deserve additional study. Now let's talk about breeds. This is one of the first things that a beginning farmer oftentimes that's getting into cattle thinks about. What breed do I want to get? Somebody will tell them, you need to get Herefords, they're the most gentle, or you need to get Angus, they've got the best beef. You need to get something different so that you've got something different from what everybody else has. You get all kinds of this type of advice from people. And there are hundreds of cattle breeds. There are even dozens now of miniature cattle breeds. You can do about whatever you want. But if you're in this to try to produce meat and have a productive, efficient herd, then you need to use some of the major breeds that are available. If your goal is to have a niche product that is something different from what everyone else has, then perhaps some heirloom breed or something like that might be in order. But you need to make sure that that's what you really want to do. The British breeds that are most common are Angus, Hereford, and Red Angus. Those all, I say they're British breeds. They were developed in the British Isles, and they have good meat quality as their general selling point. Also, they're quite gentle and easy to work with. Continental breeds are also of the genus Bos, of the genus and species Bos taurus. Simmental, Gelbvieh, Charolais, Braunvieh, as you can imagine, all of those were developed on the continent of Europe. They tend to be a little bit larger, they tend to be faster growing, and not have quite the fattening ability that the British breeds do. The continental breeds were selected by people that weren't quite as interested in the fat and the marbling as the British were. So they have those general characteristics. They're commonly used in crosses with the British breeds because they have complementary traits. Again, the British can provide a little bit more fat, a little bit more marbling, and the continental a little bit more growth and a little bit bigger size. The other one that I'll mention is the Brahmins, and these are oftentimes looked at as Indian cattle or from down in the tropics, but we do have a lot of these in the United States. And the Brahmin breeds are many, but they are of the genus and species Bos indicus, which is it shows they have very different characteristics. Now they can still breed with a Bos taurus, but they are quite different in their metabolism and their look. A couple of example breeds would be Red Brahmin and Nelore. Red Brahmin obviously being a red animal, usually polled and quite attractive looking animal. And then Nelore are the large white, grayish white Brahmin type cattle we'll see a lot down in Brazil and in Central America. Now what's more common in the United States are what we call Brahmin influenced composite breeds. And these would include Brangus, that you might imagine is a Brahmin and an Angus crossed together. Santa Gertrudis is a composite breed made up of Shorthorn and Brahman, Simbra, Simmental and Brahman, Brayford, Hereford and Brahman. So there's all of these synthetics that have some of the good characteristics of the Brahman, which is heat tolerance and insect and disease tolerance, while having the good characteristics of the British or continental breed for the meat quality. So as you try to decide what you're going to do, what you're going to encounter, and go out and look and talk to people, you'll find that most people have Angus. And the reason for that is largely because of marketing for the meat quality. The Certified Angus Beef program's been very successful. Most restaurants have some kind of an Angus burger or whatever, and there's a lot of promotion of that. And so as a result, Angus cattle have a little bit higher popularity, and they bring a little bit more in the market. Now, we'll talk about the benefits of crossbreeding, and so there are others that you can use or should be thinking about using. But again, Angus is the most common by far. So here's just a picture of a few of these. I know most of you probably have seen these or been well aware of them, what an Angus looks like. A Brangus, you see a little bit of the characteristics of the Brahman there. The ears are a little bit droopier. There's a little bit more skin underneath the neck, a little bit deeper in the sheath. Hereford being that red with a white face, very popular breed. Along the bottom, the Simmental is the continental breed, a little bit more muscling, a little bit taller, a little bit maybe coarser, you might say, than the Angus. Charolais, French breed, also very heavily muscled, a lot of growth there, and reasonably good meat quality as well. And then Geltby is of German origin, and again a little bit more growth, a little bit heavier, but pretty good maternal traits in the Geltby breed as well. Now, the other thing that you're going to encounter is crosses of all of these that are commonly used, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we come to crossbreeding programs. But there's a lot to be selected from. The reason that I'm showing these is that these, among a few others, Red Angus being one that I'll mention that's not shown here, there's a lot of animals to select from. So if you need to go buy a bull, you can go look at hundreds of Angus bulls and decide what you want to buy. If you're in a minor breed or an heirloom breed, you just may not have that much to choose from. So again, make sure that you know what you're doing as you decide what you're going to use. Now, as we talk about selecting breeding stock, it's very important from the very start that I emphasize that you need to use a good bull. And this is where a lot of people fall down. They decide they'll save a little bit of money, go down to the stock market and buy a bull or buy one from their neighbor or whatever. But you've got to be aware that half of the genetics of your calf crop came from that one individual, or from the bulls if you have multiple bulls. But nevertheless, the bull has a big influence on what your herd looks like. Several years later, all of your first calf heifers are going to be out of that bull, and if you save them. So we've got to make sure that we are using something that's good. So don't be afraid to pay good money for a bull. This day and age, $3,000 is not too much for a purebred bull. In that $2,000 maybe for a more commercially oriented bull is definitely not too much to pay. So be prepared to pay the price for a good bull. Then select heifers from early in the calving season. If you're going to save your heifers back as replacements, the ones that are born earliest will be the biggest. They will also for the time of year it is, they also will be the most fertile because their mothers conceived early and they pass that along. So selecting those heifers from early in the calf crop, and then looking for good structure and moderate size. I want to emphasize this: if you always choose the largest ones, your cows will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So don't select for increased size, but make sure that you have moderate size. You don't select anything that's too small, and you might not want something that's the biggest of your calf crop. You need to do a breeding soundness exam. We talked about that in the repro module, but do a breeding soundness exam on those heifers to make a final decision on your selection, so that you're putting some selection pressure on pelvic area and how easy the calves are born, and then also that reprotract score, so that they are early maturing. Those are two things you can select for there. Finally, when you're looking at purebred breeding stock, you'll have EPDs, expected progeny differences, to go on. It's the best information you have on how the calves are going to be expected to perform. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll encourage you to study more about it as you get into thinking about your farm. So what are EPDs? An EPD is an indicator of the genetic value of an individual animal as a parent compared to another individual in the same breed. So this is simply a way of comparing one animal to another within a breed. And so, for example, if you're looking for an animal with a low birth weight, the birth weight is indicated as plus or minus from an average in terms of pounds. And so, for example, a low birth weight bull may be 0 or +1 on birth weight, where an animal with a +4 or +5 would be expected to have calves that are 4 or 5 pounds heavier than the one that has the 0. So you can make that selection for what you're trying to do. So we need to be aware that the EPDs are based on the individual's performance, their pedigree's performance, and the progeny performance. So when you look at a bull that's in an AI stud that you can get semen on, for example, they have a lot of information on that bull himself, but they also know brothers and sisters and how they did, and they also know all of the progeny or the offspring of that bull, or of all of their pedigree, of their sisters and brothers. All of that information goes into that bull's makeup, because you can't tell everything from an individual's performance. And so these EPDs allow you to make some decisions without regarding the environment that individual animal was raised in. So what can EPDs do? Why do we use them? Well, they compare two animals of the same breed on genetic value. They can be used as a tool to increase, decrease, or maintain a trait. So if your cows need to be bigger, you can select for that. If they need to be smaller, you can select for that. If you're having problems with high birth weight, you can select for lower birth weight. And they should be used as one of several selection criteria. This is very important, because if you use a single EPD to select on, you might introduce other stuff you don't want. So you basically look at a package of EPDs on an animal that fits your criteria for growth, for milk, and that sort of thing. The other thing that has happened in the last few years is that we've rapidly gone to what's called genomically enhanced EPDs. And this is where we are starting to understand the genome of the animal and what to look for in these genes. And we can actually get much better indicator of what the true value of that animal is from looking at the DNA. And so all of these animals that you find in AI studs have been DNA tested and have some genetic enhancement to the accuracy of their expected progeny differences. Now, there are things that you can't do with EPDs, and it's important you understand that too. It doesn't really predict the outcome of an individual calf. You're looking at long-term trends in the overall program. You can't expect to have a big effect on the individual calf that's born. Also, 0 is not average for the breed, and this is something that a lot of people think a 0 is an average, but the base year is used for calculating this number, and an average is for the breed at this point is probably not 0. And so that's a fine point that you can understand with more study. EPDs are not constant, they change. So every time we get additional information on the animal, the EPDs change, and some people are bothered by this, but it's changed for the better. It's more accurate, it's more reliable. And finally, EPDs cannot make up for poor management. No matter how good the genetics of your animal is, if you don't know how to manage them, you're not going to achieve their genetic potential. So it's simply a tool to make sure that you have something you can work with. Now, as a beginning producer, you've made a decision: either you're going to be in the purebred business or you're going to be in the commercial business. And so if you're in the purebred business, you need to really understand EPDs much better. You need to be studying that, understand your breed and how the ins and outs of that work. If you're going to be a commercial producer, then what you need to be doing is using them to select your bull. That's basically where you'll be using them. And we would strongly recommend that you use crossbreeding. And so these animals would have more than one breed affecting their phenotype or what they look like. The reason for this is a phenomenon called heterosis or hybrid vigor. When you cross two animals that are distantly related to each other, they bring good traits from their genome into the mix, and the offspring is better than the average of the two parents. And we see this in dogs, we see it in humans, right? The hybrids are more are stronger and longer living and that sort of thing. And this is a genetic principle. So what we want to we want to be thinking about how we can best match up the characteristics of a breed. And in this particular picture is what we call a black Baldy, a Hereford Angus F1 cross, which is a very, very useful animal and is one of the most popular commercial cows in the country. So why crossbreeding? Let's talk a little bit more about why we do it. Well, we can use breed complementarity. So we can, if there's two breeds we want to combine the best traits of each of those, we can do that through crossbreeding. An example here would be a breed that is a very maternal breed, good growth rate, that sort of thing, but not really selected for that purpose. And then we can breed to a different breed, here in this case a Simmental, to give us that extra growth and extra milk and that sort of thing that breed can bring to the table. So we can use this breed complementarity. To maximize the benefits of our crossbreeding, we want to know that there are major benefits that occur both with the crossbred cow and a crossbred calf. And so we might incorporate that in. So in the crossbred calf, we'll have higher survival rates. They're generally more thrifty when they're born. They grow faster, just generally better doing. The crossbred cow will be more productive. She brings more calf per pound of her body weight. They have longer life, they live longer, and they reach puberty earlier. So all kinds of benefits on the cow side. And when we look at the benefits of a system that combines both, about 2/3 of the benefits are from that cow and 1/3 of the benefit from the calf. So the first thing in the principle there is the crossbred cow is a very important thing on a commercial cattle farm. So if we look at systems, there's a lot of complicated crossbreeding systems, and you can study on those, but for small farmers, we want to purchase crossbred females and breed to a terminal sire. This is probably the thing that would be recommended for many people that are beginning. So you do not raise your replacement heifers, you simply have crossbred cows, and my example would be black Baldies, breed them to a terminal sire, something like a Charolais or a Simmental to give you the extra growth, and then purchase your replacements from the same source or a different source than you've been buying them, and avoid the growing replacement heifers. That's a real simple system and a good one for our smaller producers. You can rotate the sire breed. This is something that, again, we commonly would do, breed for an Angus bull for 3 years, then sell that bull, then bring in a Hereford bull, and then bring in a Simmental bull. It keeps things changing in terms of what you have, and is one of the low sides of that. But certainly we can end up with a lot of variation in the calf crop because of many breeds being represented in the herd. The use of composites is a popular thing now, especially with larger herds where we're buying bulls that have been created for us from different breeds. The Balancer and Sim Angus being two examples of composites that are quite popular in the market, where you would go and you'd buy a bull that already had the characteristics of both those breeds. That's a little bit different than a hybrid bull, and we do have interest now in people using F1 hybrid bulls. These would be have a lot of the crossbreeding benefits in them.